This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Economics. Everyone has questions about their farm. From general inquiries to in-depth fertilizer questions, find straightforward answers at nutrien-economics.com.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your work day. Greatly appreciate you being here with us. Also greatly appreciate everybody that listens to the show on the RealAg Radio podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Continue to tell your friends, your family, your neighbors, whoever's interested in agriculture, they should be listening to this show, and we are very pleased you continue to tell everybody about it. Okay, today it's Friday, and looking forward to the RealAg Issues Panel. We've also got a beef market update today with Anne Wasko. We're going to get an update on exports of beef. Also, feeder cattle imports today. We continue to seem to have a bit of a reliance on feeder cattle coming out of the U.S. into Canada in order to keep our placement number up. So we'll see if that trend has continued here. And I think it's the August data that we have on that. So we'll hear from Anne on that and a whole bunch more. We also got a RealAg Issues panel. So Andrew Campbell of Strathroy, Ontario, dairy farmer, as well as with utensil.ca. He'll be here, as well as Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture. We got a lot of different topics to chat about today. Indeed. We're still waiting for AgriRecovery details for provinces like BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta. Not sure what is taking the federal government so long on that, and that and a whole bunch more. We're going to talk about and also the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index is going to go out next week, and so I'm going to ask the panel for their thoughts on some of the things that they are interested in finding out from farmers and ranchers across the country. If you have any feedback on today's show, well, that's easy. Love your participation. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across all the different social media platforms. Or you can just call the RealAg listener line. It is 855-776-6147. I don't know if you've been following what's going on in some of the markets here, but story at a pro farmer this morning. Brent crude surges to $89 a barrel amid Middle Eastern tensions and sanctions on Russian oil tankers. So Brent crude futures saw a significant surge, reaching $89 a barrel on Friday, marking a nearly 6% increase for the week. This uptick in oil prices comes as the conflict in southern Israel and Gaza unfolds, intensifying geopolitical risks in the Middle East. Iran's foreign minister issued a stark warning suggesting that Tehran-backed militants may potentially open a new front in the ongoing Israeli-Hamas conflict as the blockade of Gaza persists. Additionally, the U.S. imposed its first sanctions on owners of tankers carrying Russian oil priced above the G7's designated price cap of $60 a barrel to enforce measures designed to penalize Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Geopolitics continuing to blanket things that are impacting us at the farm gate. Pay attention to the diesel prices and pay attention to fertilizer here as if some of this drama continues to play itself out indeed. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to the beef market update with Anne Wasko right after
this. Proven Seed is at home in your soil. With the widest seed portfolio in Western Canada, our seed is developed and tested on and for your local acres. Our hybrids and varieties are tested by hundreds of growers, so we know how our seed will perform in your local conditions. Better returns start with seed that belongs where it's planted, and this seed belongs here. Secure your seed today at your local Nutrien Ag Solutions, or visit provenseed.ca to learn more.
It's now time for a product spotlight, and today we're talking to Vantage Ag, and we're joined right now by the president of Vantage Ag. It is Paul Sinkovich. So what makes your new liquid fertilizers so unique for both Canada and the U.S.?
When our liquid fertilizers are reacted, we add a process that makes the particle size of that nutrient 1/3 to 2/3 of a nanometer. These tiny, tiny particles are only 30 to 40 times bigger than an atom. What we find when these nutrients are sprayed on a plant, any plant, these tiny bioavailable particles are quickly absorbed by the plant and within a couple of days are throughout the entire plant and being metabolized and used by the plant. Crop safety is impeccable, and with this new technology, we can now feed plants what they need through foliar feeding more than we ever thought possible.
We've been talking to Paul Sigovich. He is president of Vantage Ag, and the product is Reacted Quantum Ag Technology. Paul, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Shaun.
It's now time to talk about the beef markets. Let's bring in our usual analyst. It is the great Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. How about that introduction?
Wow. Well, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Great stuff. Okay, let's dig in. What is happening here? We're in the midweek point of October, which is incredibly hard to believe. What's happening on the cash price front?
Well, this week in the U.S., things were pretty much flat to stronger. So in the South, we'll start there, Texas and Kansas, 183 to 184. So that's called steady to one higher. In the North, we saw 185 live and 292 delivered. So we'll call that a buck higher as well. So strength to a little degree, especially with all the uncertainty and the market upheaval in terms of what's going on in outside markets. That was good to see. The wholesale market, that choice cutout, it did close about $3.50 higher last night, just over 301 on the choice. And again, good sign to see. Typically now, as we move through the rest of October and into November, we see a very strong seasonal push higher on those wholesale prices as we get closer to, U.S. Thanksgiving and their year-end holiday season. So that seems to be falling into place. Locally here, the cash market also steady. That's starting to sound like a broken record. 390 delivered in Alberta. And so when Canfax releases their live average equivalent, I think it'll come in awfully close to that 233 again. And I think we've been in the low 230s for, upwards of 2.5 months now. I was just going to say, Shaun, on the cash situation basis, even though that's a steady market, that still means our basis is staying really wide, 16 to 17 bucks under the U.S. Whereas, last year, it was wide last year. October isn't a great month for basis. It was 24 under, but the 3-year average closer to 10. So I would say still struggling on this basis front.
Okay. And what has been the reason for that?
Again, enough cattle, enough supplies for what packers are needing. Remember, we've had a fairly big cow kill all through here late summer and into the fall in terms of the number of cows that have been coming to town, especially in both Western and Eastern Canada. But cow kill's been up, taking up a few more hook space, and packers not running, quite as aggressively in terms of harvest rates as they were, say, a year ago. So I think all those things have allowed packers to, kind of manage their kill needs a little bit, and we've got, simply put, enough cattle to fill it.
Is Packer in the black right now based on where the prices are?
In the U.S., it's kind of either side of break even. Yep. If the cutout starts to move higher as we expect, of course, that'll improve the margin. But, with the cutout struggling through a lot of September, U.S. packers were really closer to break even than anything.
And here in Canada?
Well, again, we don't have good wholesale data in Canada, so it's hard to give you a specific number. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. Carcass weights, because you said there is ample cattle to kill out there. What are we seeing from a weight perspective?
Yeah. And so this data point also supports what's going on. Last week, steer weight nationally here in Canada was 953 pounds. On a carcass basis. And so that's 5 pounds less than last year, because last year we had those really big weights. We were not current last fall. So we're under that a wee bit, but we're still 14 pounds over the 5-year average. So again, this is typically when weights, make their highs for the fall. But we've got lots of beef around. I think that's a simple answer to the question.
Yeah, when we're talking about 5-year averages, like we're still incorporating the pandemic. Does that skew the data at all when we're looking at something like carcass weights, as we saw some plants shut down during those early days?
Yeah, it sure does, Shaun, especially, it took us really, especially here in Canada, right until early 22 to get out of what we called the backlog, right? So that certainly skews the data. But even going back and looking historically, today's weight is the second biggest. So it's, and we're not in kind of that COVID backlog or in a situation or anything like that. So even with that storyline, weights are still on the big side. Yeah,
and trade obviously a huge component of this industry for sure, and that's obviously exports. But we also rely from a supply chain perspective on imports. Let's look, I guess, start off talking about feeder imports for August. You got some numbers to share.
Yeah, and maybe let's set it up, step back one point. We've got a cattle on feed report that's going to get released later this afternoon from CanFax for Western Canada on feed numbers for October 1st. And so the number that I think we're all going to be watching closely is the September placement number. Now, leading into this, remember we had June, July, and August placements all well over a year ago. Actually, for those 3 months, 48% higher than 2022. Still smaller than the 21 drought placements, down 2% from that point. But everything pointing, when you look at auction market data, that we're going to be looking at a fairly big placement number again. I went back, and of course, September 2022 was a very big placement number. So I don't think we're going to crack that one, but that's the kind of stuff we're going to be watching for this afternoon. But leading into that, Shaun, of course, then is what's another part of the placements. It's just not local auction market placements. We've got feeder cattle imports. And StatsCan did release their August numbers last week, and up basically now we're sitting, feeder imports over 20,000 head in August, very similar to August of last year, but year to date we're up 30% on our feeder imports. That's about 180,000 head. So, and very few feeder cattle exports. So when you look at that net trade flow, we're certainly sitting in a significant net import position for feeder cattle. So that will all become part of that placement number that we're going to be looking for later today.
Not surprised, really. I don't think so, no. But maybe a little bit. We're becoming very super reliant on those feeder cattle imports out of the U.S. based on our feeding capacity in Canada.
Exactly. The lack of calf crop and our increased feeding capacity. So that's still certainly a key part of the feeder supply thing. Yeah. In Western Canada. Yeah.
Let's talk about beef exports and imports for August and September. What does that say?
Well, again, same trend, Shaun. August beef exports were down 3%. And that doesn't surprise me given how, our slaughter is smaller than last year. So it makes sense. Production's down. We're probably going to export less. Year to date, we're sitting down 5%. Just going through the key countries we trade to, in August, the U.S. was up 4%. Year to date, we're up 2%. Japan, we're still down. We were down 20% in August, and year to date, down 35%. Mexico, we're sitting down 5% in August. We're still up a bit on the year. And to round it up, most of our trade into the Asian markets is also down 32% year to date into South Korea. On the flip side, though, Shaun, imports of beef in September into Canada were up 34%. And again, I think it goes down to we've got lots of beef in other countries, especially Uruguay, New Zealand, Australia, looking for markets. And we've got a very high-priced market here, especially when you look at our lean trim price or our cow market, if you will. And so that's attracted a lot of attention. We've got year-to-date, our imports of beef from Uruguay are up 63%. From New Zealand, they're up 60%. And from Australia, they're up 19%. So I think that's telling you a story in terms of this whole supply picture.
The export number, is currency playing a role there, or because you said the market is high priced here at home, that beef is just staying here because there's more margin in it?
Oh, absolutely, though. In terms of especially the Japan and Mexico markets, two opposite examples. The struggle with the yen in Japan certainly has made beef expensive to move into that market, and it has certainly showed up in our trade data being down. On the flip side, the Mexican peso and its strength has meant it's a good buy, and so we've seen, generally speaking, trade up into Mexico. So absolutely, exchange rates playing a big deal in terms of where beef's flowing to or not.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. Well, Anne, thanks so much. I know that you've got both both fingers crossed when it comes to some fall moisture here for the ranchers and the farmers. But we're going to need it, as you talk to a lot of they've been pretty spotty so far this fall from a moisture perspective, eh?
Absolutely. So that's going to be something. And it's not just here. I mean, you hear that same storyline through lots of areas of the U.S. as well. So all of us in North America are going to need some significant improvement and recovery in moisture levels.
Yeah, come on, Mother Nature, do your part. And have yourself a great weekend. You
too. Thanks, Shaun.
Low-rate MBPT solutions claim to protect nitrogen, but no imitator product delivers like Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next-gen Reese inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. See how others stack up to the proven power of Anvil at defendyourn.ca. Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get to the RealAg Issues Panel. Andrew Campbell, Lyndsey Smith, and Kelvin Heppner standing by.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground. We are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
You know, there's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
Your co-op grow team are your local experts because we live here too. Our agronomic specialists stay up to date with the latest research and technology to help support your entire farm operation. Talk to our team for advice tailored to your farm's needs. We have recommendations to help you optimize your crop yield and quality while enhancing the health of your land. Co-op. We're all growing together. Here for your farm. Here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
Let's get rolling here with the RealAg Issues Panel here on this Friday. Let's bring in the panel. Up first, Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you?
So great.
Yeah?
That's my answer. Just
why?
Yeah. Great question. Glad you asked. I am choosing for it to be great right now. No, the weather's not bad. We're all healthy in the house again because that was a tough stretch, and it has been a very long week of work because the holiday Monday always screws things up, but it has been productive, and it's been a great week of great conversations and getting stuff done, and yeah. So we're going with it's great.
Well, Thanksgiving was fantastic.
Oh, it always is.
It always, you know what? There's a saying that, college football, it always delivers. So does Thanksgiving. They're like one and the same. Also joining us is Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well here too. Like a lot of the same things Lyndsey said. We've had a good week. Family's doing well. We had an odd week where the kids had no school Monday because of Thanksgiving, and then Wednesday, a random teacher PD day in the middle of the week. So I'm lucky I actually know it's Friday today, and that I showed up here because I've been confused what day of the week it's been every day this week.
Yeah, the scheduling of PD that's a whole show in itself. The scheduling of those PD days. I don't like. What is that? They're always weird times, and somebody on our staff, their kid had the first day of school was a PD day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that may have been me.
Was it you?
Kids, yeah, it's there's so many PD days, and when they are happening, who knows why?
Why don't they happen in the summer? Just saying. Anyway, okay, let's move on to less controversial topics. Also here from Ontario, it is Andrew Campbell. How's it going, Andrew?
It is also going great in the southern part of the province, Shaun. Great to be back.
Yeah, things are good in Strathroy.
You know what? They're good. It's kind of quiet around us. Like, we took a few beans off. They were ready-ish. wouldn't say overly ready. So we kind of left everything else and we're kind of wait until next week. Like we kind of seem to be in a hurry up and go pattern is what our life seems to be. And right now it's just like, wait. So.
Okay. Let's get to some of the topics here, but first I want to tell you about Super U. You want true nitrogen protection? Skip imitator products for an agronomically effective solution like Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. Super U protects against all 3 forms of loss. All 3! And is proven to boost yield potential. See how others stack up? Just a bit of a hint here. They don't. You can go to defendyourn.ca. Kelvin, last week at this time, I think you were as well, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. Quite confident that we were going to get the details on AgriRecovery for a number of different provinces that have been facing drought. If it didn't happen on Friday, like the Saskatchewan Ag Minister David Merritt said, it was definitely going to happen on Tuesday coming out of Thanksgiving. And we're still waiting. Sounds like the PMO is a little slow here.
Yeah, there's been a change in plans here somewhere. I'm not sure. We haven't been able to determine where the holdup is, and I think that it could be the Prime Minister's office, as you just implied. But we had several sources telling us last week that that announcement was fairly imminent and likely to happen on Tuesday of this week, and that day has come and gone, and there's been no announcement of this drought assistance for livestock producers in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And so I'm not sure whether the PMO has had other priorities, of course, with what's happening in the Middle East, and perhaps that is part of the delay here, whether PMO approval is still what's holding this up, or whether there's been some disagreement on final details in terms of what these programs will look like for producers, and potentially disagreement between the federal and provincial governments. It's not clear, but yeah, we're still in waiting mode. Meanwhile, Minister McCauley was in BC this week, and BC has also applied for an AgriRecovery program to help livestock producers affected by drought and other weather-related disasters. And so they are also waiting now. That claim sounds like it might be a little bit further behind in the process, but BC is also knocking at the federal government's door. Where is our AgriRecovery money staying?
Yeah, I think it's easy to say, well, yeah, like the conflict in Israel on Saturday morning Israeli time was, probably that has them, not, and I say distracted, but just focused on something else. But it was called off before that. I looked at some sources and some contacts that I had. There's something else. Now, they may blame it on that, but something else is awry as we try to fill in some of these gaps. Lyndsey, earlier this week, you talked to Heather Watson from Farm Management Canada about a new study they have out. I believe it was on Tuesday's show as well. You used some of that audio, talking about a new study regarding women in agriculture. What stood out to you?
Yeah, so it's a pretty comprehensive study that Farm Management Canada has rolled out. There's a few really cool things in it, and one I would say if you look at it's called the environmental scan, and it pulls together parts of the report that makes it really easy to read. And there's a really cool part in there about the role of women on farm versus I believe it's the 1960s. They compare what percentage of different roles of farm life women are primarily responsible for. And there's some really cool numbers in there about what has changed and what hasn't. And some of the more traditional sort of at-home stuff has definitely stayed in the female camp, but we've seen certainly that men have taken on more roles in like meal planning, childcare, etc. But there's an interesting one that actually doesn't have a ton to do with, let's say, running a farm, but it definitely has to do with farm life that I thought was really meaningful, and it's meaningful for women, men, all of us. But women identified that taking care of older family members, they are doing that substantially more than they would have looking at decades past. And that really struck me as, because farming is a microcosm of the bigger demographic of Canadians, and we have an aging baby boomer population, and we have aging parents that need to be cared for. And this was one of the ones that it's a tiny little nugget that you might even not realize, but I was actually fascinated to think about all the stress and strain and all the things that have to happen on a farm, and coordinating with people and staff and all that. And then we've also got this layer of, rural healthcare and caring for aging parents. It really struck for me just, are we meeting the needs of our farm community in so many different aspects. And so that to me is irrelevant of gender. That's really just that's about our farm families for sure.
Well, I'm going to play a quick clip of what Heather Watson had to say about some of the results. Let's listen in.
Perhaps the biggest gaps are the lack of information that should already be out there on this stuff. So, for example, one of the key findings is that women are making extraordinary contributions to farming in Canada with a high degree of involvement in virtually every aspect of the operation. So, as an example, we're out there doing workshops and conferences and stuff, and a lot of women come up to us and say, yeah, I'm responsible for, the financial management on the farm. We're like, okay, cool. Let's, run some programs for that. But now with the results of this study, we know that we can say definitively, 69% of farm women surveyed in Canada are responsible for the financial planning and analysis on the farm. And so having those kinds of, sink your teeth into insights allows us to say.
Andrew, what do you think when you hear that number?
Well, it certainly doesn't surprise me because I think from my experience and from, kind of around our group, it actually seems low because I think for a lot of farms, that's the position that, certainly women have taken in our operation and other ones around the community. So it's one of those things that when you do hear of it, it's nice to actually hear it solidified and say, this is what is happening beyond just, what has always been a case of, just kind of rumor around and speculation.
Yeah. Lyndsey, before we take a break, as I was listening to some of the report that Heather was talking about, and I need to dig into the report and kind of go through it all myself, but I sort of found like a lot of, well, yeah, so what? Like, what do we do with this information in terms of comparing the genders and their contribution to the industry?
And so, yeah, and it's a great question. And for any work like this, we wanted, what do we do with it? So the hope is that we now have solid data for some of the assumptions that have been made about women's role in agriculture. So that, could be used in policy development, et cetera. But I would take it a step further. I think that it probably does outline for producer groups, for even so far as, engineering and software development, et cetera. If we have better stats about, the roles in which women have in a farm business that are predominantly women, we probably should be designing things with the actual end user in mind. And for many of those instances, it's actually women, not men. And so my hope, at least personally, is that we start to see, focus groups and development actually happen for the end user, who in this case, for a lot of these roles in farming, are women.
We got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio right after this.
Dedication. Watching the sunset over your crop is one of life's simple pleasures. The anticipation of it all. We know that feeling. Introducing our new Airflex NXT, our best honeybee header yet with the closest cut ever. Light, fast reacting, and infinitely adjustable. More yield, less time and work. Airflex NXT focuses on the future. What drives your next? Visit honeybee.ca or contact your nearest honeybee dealer.
What were the issues in your fields this year? Did you do a soil sample? What is your soil sample telling you about some of the nutrient issues that you might be having going into next year? What herbicides did you use? What residues you might be concerned about? What weed issues did you have? What crop residues did you have? How well do you know your fields?
Get the answers to all the questions you have about your pulse crop at the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
Man, that felt like the longest commercial break ever. Trying to get back to the battle here. Okay, Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Andrew Campbell, Lyndsey Smith, and Kelvin Heppner, breaking down the biggest issues of the week. Kelvin, I know you follow foreign affairs quite in a detailed manner. A lot of criticism for Canada and also in the U.S. for really being slow getting Canadians and Americans out of the region in Israel. Do you think that's fair at this point, only a week into this?
That's a good question. I think it certainly harkens back to what happened in Afghanistan and how poor a job the Canadian government did there, getting Canadians and also the interpreters that worked with Canada and had their lives put at risk during that when the Taliban came back in there. So yeah, I think that's something that everybody is certainly sensitive to, and Foreign Affairs probably is more than anybody else. But at the same time, it does look in some ways like they have been slow in that. Why were we not quicker to move on some of these things? Certainly a lot of this comes back to resources and even foreign affairs capacity. This is maybe the latest example in a long line of issues where it seems like Canada's capacity, the foreign affairs, foreign policy apparatus in our country is weak and thin, at least compared to what it used to be. You look at interactions with China and the Meng Wanzhou Huawei affair. You look at the India fiasco over the last couple of months. There's just all these examples of where there doesn't seem to be depth in the Canadian government's approaches and strategy, and there should even be foresight in some of these issues. Like let's be running different scenarios, and what happens if this happens? Then we can have these resources we can put into this. Like conflict between Israel and Palestine or Hamas, it's something that isn't sure we've probably been taking it for granted over the last couple decades how peaceful the situation has been there. I know for people that live there, it hasn't been, but from far away, on a relative scale, we haven't seen many escalations like this over what we've seen over the last week, and it shouldn't have been unforeseen to have resources ready for a situation like this.
Yeah, we're too busy focusing on real serious topics like the government trying to get grocery prices down. On RealAg Politics this week, I chatted with Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI, and he was a little critical of Minister McCauley not being more engaged on this topic since it has to do with agri-food. Here's what he had to say.
I think it is, and I think it's important to remember that competition is in Minister Champagne's portfolio. But if you would have asked 2 months ago what minister was responsible for or had the lead on food prices in Canada, I would have said Minister McCauley. I would have said that the Agriculture and Food Minister should be the lead on those types of issues, and Minister McCauley hasn't been at the table. I think that this is a huge missed opportunity. I do think this isn't an easy solution. I think that the example that I like to use is the supply chain task force that the government launched is a good way for governments to tackle complex issues like that. You know, there was no single solution on the supply chain side. The government could have launched a food price task force, looked at it all along the food value chain, looked at what does it mean for production agriculture, where are there costs that can be taken out of the system without making anybody less profitable, because we do need profits. Profits are a good thing. We need people to want to be in the business, but the governments haven't done that. They forgot about the rest of the chain. So it's good that they're thinking about food, but they really should be thinking about the entire food system.
Oh, Kelvin, that just seems like, or Lyndsey, that just seems like way too heavy of a lift.
To actually have the agriculture minister, agriculture and agri-food involved in agri-food. No. So, but this is one of the things that I think is key that McCann points out is that, you know, for this last little while, the federal government has been sort of hyper-focused on the retail end and is sort of kind of ignoring the rest of the value chain, all the way from farming all the way back up to retail. So I think that the criticism is valid, personally, and I'd love to ask all of you, you know, Macaulay's been back in this seat for a while, and I know he's made a couple trips, but other than that, I haven't really seen much from the minister or from the minister's office.
Yeah, we've been, and honestly, to add to that, been trying to have him on to talk about what is his thoughts on his second time around the horn here. And we're still waiting.
How's that going?
We're still waiting. And he will. Like, I know we'll eventually, but he's been in the seat for a while here. Like, he shouldn't come on. We played this game a month ago. Write Macaulay's mandate letter. You know what's going to be in it. We don't have to wait for that. There's the issues are right in front of us. Not much is going to change in that mandate letter. So, Andrew, what do you think about McCann's criticism?
Well, I think it actually follows kind of a trend over the last. This isn't an issue of this year, but over the last several decades of honestly a weakening of agriculture and agri-food Canada. things and files and portfolios keep kind of getting shuffled off as, oh, maybe this is somebody else's issue, or maybe somebody else should do it, and then they don't come back. Like the one that I always, kind of think back was when kind of CFIA got moved more to Health Canada than it was to Ag Canada, through, the maple leaf listeria outbreak. And, since then you look and you just see this general weakening of it, and, oh, well, maybe this policy is better with this minister, and then it never comes back. So it's one of those that, like, clearly government after government hasn't prioritized and made, okay, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada should take a lead on all things food related, ag export related, anything ag related at all. So, like, it doesn't necessarily surprise me. It's just too bad it can't have the strength of a department like USDA does in the U.S.
Kelvin, my perception is that the ag department has just moved to more stakeholder management. I think stakeholder management is, trying to appease all the different groups, keep them quiet. And honestly, I think that's one of Macaulay's strengths, is meeting with people and hearing them. And so I think that's a part of that narrative too.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Yes, Shaun. And the sustainable ag strategy would be one example where the ag department is given these goals from outside of the ag department, broader government goals, and basically their mandate is to implement as much as possible while keeping stakeholders happy. But to Tyler's point about the missed opportunity here to have a food price strategy discussion similar to the supply chain strategy thing that happened, I think I agree 100% that this should be happening. But the problem is it should have been happening 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The Liberals are facing a short-term problem here, and a very short-term problem here in the polls. It's come up this summer, and they are seeing food prices as a major issue politically, and so they need a short-term solution. And there is no short-term solution to this, and that's why I think Macaulay has been fairly quiet on this. He probably understands there's nothing they can do really in the very short term to bring prices down, as much as Champagne wants to wave those flyers on TV and say they're meeting on a Friday, brought prices down on a Saturday or whatever it was 2 days later. This is a long-term thing. Discussions about where there should be public investment and opportunities for public money in our food system in Canada. It's not a short-term fix, and right now the Liberals are facing this problem of we need to address this issue because it's it's political, almost crisis mode in terms of where they're feeling they're at in the polls and the impact food prices are having there.
Okay, before we take a break, you mentioned sustainable ag strategy. I'm going to go around the horn here, and I'm going to ask you for your quick opinion on this. Okay, so I have been hearing from multiple sources that the sustainable ag strategy, we talked about this a little bit last week, is not going great. The 22 groups are having a hard time finding a consensus. Shocker. And there is going to be a pretty large mass exodus from some farm groups out of this process because they are going to have a hard time signing off on the document. Should they do that? Should they stick in, fight the good fight, or are they warranted to leave and fight the process going forward? Lyndsey, what's your thought?
I say, well, I guess this is the tough one, is that it sounds like there's been a lot of time already devoted to this. You have to sort of decide, do you cut and run and cut your losses, or do you keep putting resources into, a structure or an organization or a group that you just don't think will get anywhere? So that's a tough one. I, for one, sort of feel like, I could say leaving is the right move if it meant that, it sort of disbands and you regroup. If leaving means that just those who are left get to have the say, I'd say stick it out.
Kelvin?
It depends on, to me, I see a communications challenge shaping up here in terms of if farm groups leave the sustainable ag strategy, is that going to come across as them being unsustainable or in favor of things that are not sustainable? And that's, there's going to need to be some clear messaging as to why these groups are leaving and the fact that there is still a massive commitment to sustainability from these groups.
Andrew, what say you?
Yeah, I think it's one of those that I wouldn't be one to, push for groups to pull out, because I do think you need to be part of the conversation. in discussions like that. I actually think the challenge then, though, will be moving forward. Then if a strategy does come forward and groups are seen backing it, then all of a sudden there will be major pushback from grassroots growers, people across the country. And then does it fall apart anyway? So it's kind of one of those things that I really don't want to say it's doomed, but it certainly doesn't look good no matter what the situation is with groups leaving or going.
And Lyndsey, said the time commitment, resource commitment. They've been meeting every 2 weeks. So this is taking a lot of people power, so to speak, to get at least even to this stage to participate. Hey, let's take a break. We got more coming up here on the RealAg Issues panel right after this.
At Brett Young, we focus on what's real. It's how we became Canada's largest independent seed company. That's why we're asking a real farmer, what do you think of BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid?
What's that?
BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid with Pod Defender shatter reduction technology and Defender-rated club root and blackleg resistance.
Good yield, yeah. Probably choose it again.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to your Brett Young retailer today to see for yourself. Brett Young, distinct by design.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Busting through all the big topics of the week here on the RealAg Issues panel. Shaun Haney, Andrew Campbell, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, having some fun and talking about some serious stuff as well. Let me tell you about your co-op grow team. They stay up to date with the latest research and technology to help support your entire operation. Talk to their team for advice tailored to your farm's needs. Co-op. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm. Okay, let's continue the discussion. Okay, so next week, we're coming out with the latest survey from Real Agri Studies. It's the October intake for the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. And so we always ask, a bunch of standard questions like we do every week. I'm curious, based on all that is happening right now across this country in the industry of agriculture, and we talk about it here on the show every day, but what would you like us to try to figure out and find out? What are you curious about when it comes to the farmers' attitudes, behaviors, and thoughts here right now in the current environment? Andrew, is there something that comes top of mind?
Well, I'm demoing a tractor right now, and the price of equipment is definitely a sentiment I'd love to know. It's one of those things that given just where everything is at, obviously, crop prices coming down, yields around here are average, interest rates up. Like, what's everybody's ability and thought, like, moving forward, not just for this winter, but over the next, several years in terms of their, whether it's turning over equipment, whether it's their growth plan, just where everybody is at, kind of for the medium term, I think is a big question. Cause, around our neighborhood, everybody seems, fine and comfortable, but I don't think it's one of those situations where everybody's just gangbusters to let's, make big progress here in the next couple of years. There seems to be that wait and see approach. I'd love to know if that's across the country.
Yeah, I think you're going to get some regional differences, especially if you're in the drought zone. They're probably saying, I just wish it would rain. But I think you're right. I think for some reason it feels like, and we thought that 23 would be this, but circumstances kind of changed. 24 potentially could be of a transition year when it comes to farm profitability, based on some of the expectations of the movement of some of these variables. Kelvin, what comes to your mind in terms of being curious about what's going on?
I'd be quite similar in terms of what Andrew just referenced. Listening to your interview this week with Brian Voth of IntelliFarm and just how bearish a lot of the signals are right now in the grain markets as well. He's talking 380 corn and things like that. This is on top of course, signs of recession if we're not already in one, and struggling broader economic data and rising interest rates and potentially things breaking in the economy if interest rates keep rising. And there's just a lot of things there that I think will be captured in just our regular sentiment index questions that we ask every period when we send this survey out. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how it's changed and where things are trending there. Just how optimistic versus pessimistic the balance is in as we approach the end of 2023 here.
Well, what we've seen in the last 12 months is Canadian farmers are continually more negative about the future farm financial performance in comparison to their current farm financial performance. So meaning current farm financial performance has been in some ways kind of neutral, but that's okay. But I'm worried about the future. That has been the trend in all of the months that we have done the index. Lyndsey, and I think right now as I sit here and you think about, the still undetermined what's happening with fertilizer, we've been hearing nothing but issues around diesel prices going to be going up. And of course the commodity markets are really kind of an unknown and been in a real sideways trade. There's going to be some things for people to manage here for 24.
Yeah. And so I think that, my question actually comes from what Andrew and Kelvin are talking about, and exactly that question. I guess that my question I'd like to know, this does tie in a little bit to the women in farming discussion as well, is who is involved in the financial decisions on the farm and how are those financial decisions made? I think it could be interesting to talk about, or looking at it another way, something around the cost of production. Like, do you update your cost of production every year, twice a year, 3 times a year? Things that you
Never.
include or don't include. Never. Do you actually know your cost of production, or is it just in your head? And we've sort of asked that question before in we have a poll on the website on RealAgriculture.com that we put up every week. Obviously not the demographic behind it that the survey has, but we've asked, who could, if you wanted to show someone, your cost of production, does it exist only in your brain, on a piece of paper, on a spreadsheet that other people could access? And so something along those lines, I think, is important at this time when you do start to think about that shift potentially in 2024 of profit margins being, squeezed. Who is involved in those financial decisions, and how do you make those? I think would be an interesting perspective.
If you have any feedback on that, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, and give me your thoughts on some things that you are curious about, and we'll try to include it in this month's survey going on next week. Now, in the U.S., interesting enough, this week, Virginia Tech, now I think the money's coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, $80 million, I think, going out across 5 states, like Minnesota, North Dakota, and a few others, where farmers for implementing environmentally friendly practices can get upwards of $100 an acre over 3 years. And this is a pilot project that they're hoping to expand over a greater geography. Kelvin, we have not, this is, again, seeing more and more money going into people implementing these practices, and no real clear idea as far as what results we're seeking.
Yeah, similar parallels to the On-Farm Climate Action Fund program here in Canada in terms of producers receiving payments in some cases for things that are only 1 year of practice or 1 year of activity. And so can the government continue to finance things at that rate going into the future? I'm quite skeptical of that. And so it doesn't seem like a sustainable way of incentivizing. So yeah, we'll see. But, and again, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, the scale of this funding. We talked about that report that came out last week, how Canadian farmers are not seeing the same level of environmental and climate incentive programs and funding. Just the sheer amount of money being spent is not nearly the same in Canada as it is in the US and other competing countries. So something to pay attention to.
Yeah. Lyndsey, I know you listened to that interview that I did with RBC and the RL Food Institute at the University of Guelph. Do you think there's the political will in Canada to get on par on a relative basis with some of these other countries like the EU and the US when it comes to some of these policies? Or is it basically just, hey, farmers, you shall do this?
So I'd love to say, of course there is. I mean, this is a huge focus for the Liberal government, and yes, they're going to back it. No, because they quite honestly are out of money, and when I say they, that means us, everybody. We are out of money. Our government is spending our money. So I definitely, though, I do get the sense, and this is a shift, and we'll see how it trickles down into policy programs, etc. That it seems to be that maybe the pressure has come off a little bit as far as government pushing and funding some of these, as Kelvin says, sort of one-off ad hoc type things. I guess we'll see as the SCAP money starts to flow as to what programs or policies or initiatives that funds, where that all goes. But I get the sense that while it certainly has been a focus for at least the Agriculture Department and the Agriculture File, I feel like this government is pivoting to some other things like affordability and these sorts of things, and I just don't see it being as much of a focus, certainly at least where the dollars are concerned. Now, all that being said, that should never be related to AgriRecovery, etc., so get on it, everybody. So just putting that out there.
Anita and Anne at the Treasury Board asked all the cabinet ministers to come forward with cuts to find money in the federal budget. So we haven't heard yet if that's affecting agriculture or where. But
there is no way that ECCC will have to find any money.
No, but agriculture. Well, we've heard the Department of Defense, the head of Canada's military has said they've been asked to find some of those savings. So, which
is ridiculous given what we're dealing with in the world of geopolitics, that somehow we would already take a military that is so underfunded and try to find more cuts. Like, what, we're not going to give everybody a helmet this year? Like, that's what we're down to at this point. Like, it's insanity. I don't get that. That's a whole soapbox for me, but you guys may think differently, but do you think differently?
Well, certainly I think that one of those things that agriculture with all of these funding programs, like it sounds great that, this funding might be available for a year, but as Lyndsey mentioned, like it's not going to last. Like, it's where things are going to get cut. And it's one of those challenges for all of us in ag. I run into the same problem as a farmer too, is you're kind of, do you chase some of these programs or not? Because, you chase them and that sounds great for a year or two, but then was it a complete waste of time because the program evaporates and somebody else changes it and it's a new priority and all of these types of things that, like, it's one of those. I know our strategy has just been simply to, if a program fits, then let's apply for it. But at the end of the day, we're just going to plow ahead and do what we're going to do anyway. And because we just can't keep making these changes based on what they want to do on a whim.
Well, gang, we are out of time. Really appreciate your input, your thoughts, your contribution here to the show. Great work. Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. You as well.
Lyndsey, I know you're a big hockey fan. Enjoy the Senators this weekend. Do they play? I think so.
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. Too busy on the sheep farm for hockey,
That's
Shaun.
right.
What are you talking about? Andrew, thanks a lot, buddy. Really appreciate it, and all the best to you.
All the best to you guys, too. Thanks, Shaun.
If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Make sure you check out realagriculture.com over the weekend. There's so many interviews and stories that don't make it onto this show. Make sure you also check out The Agronomist Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern. But I think we're taking Monday off, aren't we, Lyndsey?
No, this Monday we have a show.
We do?
It's going to be great. It's all about insects. Which I love.
Bugs. Entomologists. They are awesome. Fun people.
It's true.
Love it. That's 8 o'clock Eastern. Go to realagriculture.com/live. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Economics. With one-of-a-kind tools, research, and content, Economics is farming's go-to information resource. Find it all on nutrient-economics.com or download the app.